Hey everybody, welcome to Leo the Lefty. Hope everybody's doing good today. Um, I'm going to be telling you all about Hinterkaifeck today, which is a pretty popular case. I mean, especially if you're in the true crime world, you've heard it before, but since it's an oldie, I'm going to go ahead and cover it again because I thought, why not? This is the art piece I'm working on. It's just a crazy little shop of horror style um, monster Venus flytrap thing, and I just picked it mainly because I think it will take about the same time as the case I'm going to tell you. So that's why. And also, I liked it. He spoke to me today. Drew him, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 maybe years ago, and he's just been in one of my sketchbooks hanging out waiting for this moment. So I'll get into it. So Hinterkaifeck, it means behind Kaifeck, and so I was trying, because I love maps, I was trying to like really find a really good map that I could recreate and draw myself. If I couldn't find the property that it happened on itself, I wanted to find a map of the area, and I did find some, but none that were really clear enough to draw from, so I don't have any maps for you this time. I'm sorry, but I'll try to paint the picture of, the logistics of the area from the best I could understand from the sources and everything, because it's not always clear and it's not always the same from source to source, so just gonna do the best I can for y'all. Alrighty, that's already popping, isn't it? Alright, so we're gonna go back to March 31st, 1922, which was just about 102 years ago, so not that far over my minimum of true crime. If this is your first episode, I do cover some true crime cases, but I only cover ones that are like 100 years old or older. And the reason for that is because, for one, there is plenty of other true crime creators, podcasters, YouTubers out there that cover the modern cases, and that's great. I'm a listener. I have like 400 different podcasts I listen to throughout the week, depending on when they release their new episodes and everything. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. My number one favorite podcast of all time is Let's Go to Court with Brandy Pond and Kristen Caruso. And I've been listening to them I discovered them about 4 years ago, 4 years ago. I can't remember exactly, but by the time I discovered them, they had been doing it for a couple of years. They're brilliant. They're hilarious. If you've never heard of them, again, it's called Let's Go to Court. And if you like a podcast with quite a bit of banter and some hilarious jokes, they have so many inside jokes. So they would be good for you if you like that. If you don't like banter or laughing, then it might not be for you, which, I have plenty of podcasts that I listen to that are banter, and then I have some just straightforward ones, like Case File is a good example of that's just the narrator telling you the case. There's no commentary or opinions given. It's literally just the facts. So I like both kinds, but Let's Go to Court is my favorite. I've been a member of their Patreon for a couple of years and everything, so highly, highly recommend. And they do, Brandy covers, mostly the murders and things like that. And occasionally Kristen will too, but she will cover like crazy lawsuits and, just stuff like that. It's always really interesting, always really fun. So again, I highly recommend them. And if you give them a listen, I hope you enjoy. But let's get into Hinterkaifeck and 1922. So, a little bit of backstory about the family before we get into the day's events. It is a father, Andreas Gruber, and his wife, Kazilla Gruber. Andreas is 63, Kazilla is 72, from the best of my resources. And their grown daughter, Victoria Gabriel, who's 35. And Victoria has 2 children. She has Kazilla Gabriel, 7, and Joseph Gabriel, 2. And then they have just taken on a new maid. Literally, like, the events happen on March 31st, and their new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44, had started work on March 30th. So literally the day before this happens. She arrived that day, and they believe the events happened like that night, sometime between midnight and like 5 a.m. I believe is when they think it might have happened. So a little bit about the family is they live on Hinterkaifeck, which is, they have a farm, and from what I understand, it belonged to Victoria, the grown daughter. It wasn't, Andreas and Kazilla did not own this farm, but they were, considering the time in the area, they were pretty well off. I won't say they were rich, but they had some money, and they were kind of seen as a strange family. Now, Victoria was a member of the church, and she sang in the choir and all that, but they kind of kept to themselves, the whole family did, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. Kazilla, the young girl, the 7-year-old, she did go to school. So she, got out of the house and everything. Now, Victoria had been married before to a man named Carl Gabriel, and he had died in World War One, while she was pregnant with her daughter, Kazilla. So, that was probably rough for her, especially because, we'll get into this, trigger warnings for, family-related SA and CSA. If you don't know what those terms mean, you can Google them. I do not know if that will get me banned from YouTube, which is why I'm not saying them. So, I'm just trigger warning for that. And if you don't want to hear it, I would skip forward a little bit, like a few minutes, probably 5 to 6 minutes maybe. Anyhow, so it was determined at one point that Joseph and Victoria, they say they had been having an incestual relationship, but I think what had happened was he had probably been abusing her most of her life, and that just continued. And then she got married, and hopefully, we don't know for sure, it stopped for a while, but Carl went off to war, and so she didn't have a husband there, and it seems like it continued again after that. And by then she would have been an adult, but keep in mind of the times, the 1920s, and this is in Weidhofen, Bavaria, Germany. So, we have to also keep in mind that because of the time, women were often blamed for their own assaults and abuse. Their abusers were often let off the hook. So, even today, that still happens. But back then, it was like a big deal. Because at one point, after they were adults, somebody reported their relationship, and I hesitate to use that word, but they reported the situation, and Joseph spent a year in jail, and Victoria spent a month in jail for incestuous relationship with her father. So, pretty messed up, because obviously she was the victim, and probably it had been happening her whole life, and she had already been gotten to a point where she probably didn't resist, because he probably threatened her or her children if she did. And this would also be a time and a place where you are expected to take care of your parents. And so that's probably why they were living with her on her farm. But a lot of that isn't really given in the sources. I'm just going by context of the time and the place. So that's why I think, she was probably taking care of her parents and everything. So, after Carl dies, he dies before the baby is born, before Casilla is born, and then, shortly after he dies, Victoria gives birth to Casilla. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find, yes, that's the color I want. So that kind of leaves open the parentage for her son Joseph. Now, there are plenty of people who think that her father was probably the baby's father. And then there's also the idea, the theory that her neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, might have been the baby's father, because they had Victoria and Lorenz had a relationship together, and had even almost been married at one point, but it seems like the marriage fell through, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if her father had something to do with that. At one point, he denied being the baby's father, but then he, at another point, did start to take financial responsibility for the child. So that has never been determined, if he was actually Joseph's father or not. But Victoria was an unwed woman who has a dead husband. She's a widower, and she has a child, a very long time after her husband's death, that leaves nothing in question about Carl possibly being the baby's father. Like, that it just wasn't possible. Because by then he had already been dead for about 8 years. So definitely was not the father of young Joseph. And we'll never know if her own father was the baby's father or if Lorenz was. It's just something we'll never get to know. But they were neighbors, and it doesn't seem like they were like neighbors like here in the U.S. where houses are like 12 feet apart. There was some distance, but it seemed like they were Lorenz was their one of their closest neighbors. And many people said that he was bitter about the way the relationship with Victoria ended, but not really anybody knows if he was bitter at her or bitter at her father, but maybe both. I mean, it could be both. So that's something to keep in mind when we talk about, events going forward and everything. Yoink. Sorry, I'm going to try to get this turned around before I can jump into my notes again here. So, aside from all the dysfunctional, fuckery that's going on the farm with this family, there's also some other weird occurrences that happen. And, later in the theories, we'll talk about what some of these strange occurrences make people think. I personally don't agree, but we'll go over it. So, they were hearing strange sounds in the attic that sounded like footsteps, And this is a couple of days before the main event happens. So Yosef would go up there to see what was going on, and he could never find anything. There wasn't anybody up there that he could see. And no, I don't really have a floor plan of the house, so I don't know if, you know, there were any hiding spots or anything like that. I did look, but couldn't find anything, so sorry for you. And another weird occurrence happened a few days before the main events, which was a newspaper from a Munich publication was found by outside around the house. And Joseph had absolutely no idea where it came from, and he asked the postman if the postman had delivered it, and the postman said no, that nobody that he knew of had a subscription to that paper, so he wouldn't have been carrying one. And it was just very strange because they could never figure out where that newspaper came from. Then there were footsteps, so it seems like there was, like the house and like the barns and the main area, an open field, and then a tree line that led to a wooded area. And in between the house and that tree line, there were footsteps coming from the tree line to the house, but there were never any footsteps leaving. And they couldn't find where, the person had gone, because once he got up to the main property, wherever he walked, there wasn't as much snow, and so there weren't the footprints. A house key goes missing also the same week of the events, and that is weird. Nobody seems to know, who lives on the property seems to know where this key is, where it went. And then when they found the footsteps in the snow, they went to one of the buildings there. It wasn't the house, and it wasn't the barn. It was a different, like, shed or building or something, and the lock on it was broken. So that was a very weird thing. Stuff was going missing or being moved around, and it was little things like food and tools and things like that. Food would go missing, and I know what we're all thinking. We're thinking of Frogger, right? I mean, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I've always thought, until there was a term for it recently. But before that, I was like, you got some boogin living in your house, and it ain't like a supernatural boogin, like a ghost. It is a human boogin, which is more terrifying. And the previous maid that worked for the family had quit specifically because she believed the house was haunted. She always heard weird noises and felt like somebody was watching her, and just essentially got the creeps. And so she quit, and that's when they had Maria come work for them, and she had arrived the day of March 30th. All right, so that's kind of the backstory about what's going on. A little bit before the murders had happened, the older Casilla, I guess she had some sort of it sounds like she probably was having a fight with Yosef, and some sort of domestic violence incident occurred, and she took off in the middle of the night in her nightgown and into the woods, into the snow and everything, and she had to be tracked down by the family and brought back inside and all that. So it's not a good situation for the women on this farm, and I can well imagine it wasn't a good situation for the children either. Very upsetting and disturbing stuff going on with Yosef there. Sounds like an absolute creep. And if I remember, I'll give you my little opinion on him at the end, other than what I just said, because it's probably going to upset people, but yeah, some others might agree with me. Anyway, so let's fast forward. It's March 30th. Maria has arrived. They do some stuff, like Joseph is working outside in the barn. The women are doing stuff in the house and all that. Maria is new. She just showed up that day. So she's probably like getting to know the lay of the house and how the dynamic is with the family, although she probably has no fucking clue what she's about to get into. She doesn't really have time to get into anything anyway, so it seems like nobody heard from the family after March 30th. Like, nobody had seen them. Casilla hadn't been to school. Victoria hadn't been to church. Joseph hadn't been into town. Nobody was picking up their mail, and their mail was starting to pile up. There was no movement seen at the house for a couple of days, but neighbors that were close enough to see nearby did say that they saw smoke coming from the chimney. So, you know, they hadn't seen the family, but there had been smoke coming from the chimney. And so after a while, when nobody was picking up the post, Casilla hadn't been seen in school and hadn't been given, like, nobody had informed the school, like, why she wouldn't be in. You know, nobody had called her in sick or anything like that. And Victoria hadn't been to choir practice or church. So finally, a few people decide they're going to go and check it out. Let's see, I wrote down the people that went to the house, and I'm sorry. I always think I'm writing my notes the way I need to, and then it turns out I probably should have done it different. Or maybe I didn't write their names down, because we'll get into that later. Let's see here. Jack Siegel is one of the men, and he took a couple of men with him out to the farm to see what was going on. And, you know, they get there, and they're looking around, and they're not seeing the family. They're kind of hollering for them, and nobody's coming out to talk to them or anything, and they do think it's weird. Lorenz, the neighbor, was one of these men that was with Jack Siegel looking for the family. And, you know, they go up to the front door. A couple of the men go to the front door, and it is locked. And Lorenz and another guy or two, because it's different in all the sources how many men actually went, but one or two of the guys went with Lorenz to the barn because they thought, you know, maybe somebody might be working out there or whatever. And, you know, they didn't really see anybody right away, but Lorenz notices a shoe in a big pile of hay. When he walked into the barn at some direction, there's a big pile of hay, and he notices a shoe in the hay, and so he goes over there and starts kind of digging through the hay, and that's when he finds almost the whole family. Their bodies are stacked on top of each other, and it is Casilla, the grandmother, Joseph, the grandfather, and Victoria, their daughter, and then young Casilla. And let's see. So, grandmother Casilla, her skull was cracked, and it had multiple blows and signs of strangulation, and she was struck 7 times. Andreas, his face was caked all in blood and was described as shredded, with a cheekbone exposed, protruding from the flesh. So he had been pretty messed up by something. You know, something had really gotten a hold of him. Victoria, her skull was also shattered, and she had signs of blunt force trauma to her face, and she was stabbed 9 times, which sounds utterly brutal. Young Casilla had a shattered jaw. Her face and neck were covered in slash marks. And now this part is unbelievably sad. It appears she didn't die immediately, and she laid there for a few hours, and because of the pain and the shock, she started pulling out clumps of her own hair. Now, anybody who has heard this case before knows that part, and it's always so messed up and sad. Always. And I hate giving that little detail, but it is part of the case, you know. So, you know, these men are like stunned and shocked and everything, and they know, especially Lorenz knows, there's a baby there somewhere, and they go up to the house, and Lorenz brings out a key and opens the door. So apparently he just had a key to their home, but they had like, after him and Victoria had ended their relationship, they'd had kind of a bad relationship with him, because then she went after him for child support, and so people did think it was weird that he had a key. But then again, they were neighbors, and at one point she was going to marry him, so maybe it's not so weird that he had a key. People are of two minds about it, really. I don't know either. I don't know how I feel about it either. It will come into play later. So they go inside the house, and they go up, and they find little Yosef, the baby, has blunt force trauma to the head and face, and he was found in Victoria's bed. And there are some sources that say he was wearing one of his mother's dresses. Now, obviously, a 2-year-old cannot wear their mother's dress, so I don't know if this means somebody like tried to put it over him or on him in some way. That's never really discussed too deeply, but it is very weird. Now, if the dress is just thrown over him, that's not that weird. A lot of times when killers are ashamed of what they've done, they will cover the body or the face because they don't want to look at them. So if it's something like that, it makes sense. But if it's not, and it is like some weird dressing up of the body of the little boy, that is, you know, a lot different in terms of just it being covered or dressed. But they're not clear on that. Now, this poor maid, Maria, who literally just got there, she's found in her quarters with blunt force trauma to the head. She's found in her bed, and her body is covered by a sheet. So, you know, she's been killed too, and it was literally her first day on the job. So that really, really sucks. And, you know, the people looking around at this crime scene, they've never seen anything like it, of course. This is not a common thing. So it's terrifying and scary and all of that. Now, it's not a common thing there. In the little town where they're located. It is common, which people, I don't think they realized it at the time, but at the time it was extremely common in North America, in the United States. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but, and I've got a great book recommendation if you're interested in knowing more about that. It involves a different case that I've already written the script to, and I will cover in the coming weeks, Hinterkaifeck Murders. But, yeah, so clearly in the United States, somebody going around and murdering people, an entire family, was quite common. So as they look around, they notice that, you know, the family has been dead for a while, but whomever killed them stayed in the house and like lived there for a couple of days. They saw, you know, food that looked like somebody had prepared and was about to eat. And I'm thinking whoever this was literally about to eat when they showed up and started searching the property and everything. And they somehow were able to get out and not ever be found. But they noticed just things moved around the house, not kept the way the family had kept them, and they realized that yes, somebody had been living here after the family was murdered in the house for a few days with, you know, 4 bodies outside and 2 inside. It was very spooky and strange and just unsettling. And this kind of kicks off a massive investigation, but, you know, at the time, they're forensics. They don't have, of course, they don't have DNA. It doesn't, fingerprints and use of fingerprints was in existence at this time, but I never saw anything in the sources that mentioned fingerprints, so I don't know that they took any. Ouch. I'm sorry. I had to scratch my ankle and I just totally knocked the table. I might go a different color with this bottom jaw, so I'm going to try to blend that down some. Of all the markers, this color, this purple, it doesn't have a large tip like some of the other ones do, and I wish it did because it would look better and not take as long to color everything in. And while the suspect was there, he did take care of the animals. It seems he was feeding the livestock and, you know, just generally taking care of them. So, I mean, at least he did that. Weird, but I don't know if he was playing house or what. It's just a weird thing that people noticed that the animals had been taken care of. And by then they kind of knew that since the family hadn't been seen in a few days, because they find them on April 2nd, I believe. So it's about 2 or 3 days when the family is found. I know I have that written down somewhere. Why did I not see it? Maybe I didn't. I'm sorry, I've failed y'all. Wouldn't be the first time. The weapon was believed to be a mattock, which is pretty much like a pickaxe, and which sounds horrifying, you know, honestly, that sounds terrible. Let me dig through my markers here and figure out what color I want to do. Let's do orange for his hair up here. It's believed that, you know, that was the main weapon, but they also believe there was, you know, a knife involved and everything because of, you know, some of the family had like slash wounds and stab wounds and things like that. So it's, to this day, it's not really known how, it is believed that each victim in the barn was killed in the barn, but it's not known how the suspect would have gotten them out there, if he somehow did it one by one and lured them out, if he kind of took them hostage and took them out. Nobody knows. So, can't tell you that, sorry. Okay, there it is. Yeah, the murders took place sometime in the wee hours of March 31st. And they were discovered on April 4th. I'm sorry, I think I said 2nd earlier. One of my most recent cases I was researching has a date in it for April 2nd, and I think I was mixing the two up. Anyway, I failed you again. Alright. So, this causes a huge ruckus in town. People are all, what the fuckery is happening? And it becomes, because it's so gruesome and it's so, like, shocking, it becomes sort of sensationalized, of course, and people want answers. They want to know, because, hey, are they safe? Are they going to be murdered in their beds? Is there a deranged killer on the loose? And my answer to that is yes. There is a deranged killer on the loose. By all means, panic now. But, they're investigating, and they are the cops. The police are investigating and doing interviews and kind of thinking they're landing on a suspect, and then realizing that no, their alibi checks out, which, I mean, come on. Back then, how easy would it be to lie about something and have an alibi? Some of them had ironclad alibis, and some of them were just like, yeah, my friend will vouch for me that I was there. It's, and they just are like, okay. Of course, this is in the days before a lot of forensic evidence, so they can't do much without any evidence, and they don't have a lot. They just have the crime scene and no, pointed evidence as to who did anything. They tossed around the theory that maybe Yosef had gone crazy and killed everybody, but then, obviously they were like, well, he probably didn't do that to himself. So this one time, Yosef gets a pass, that he actually didn't do the thing this time. But honestly, fuck that guy. He still was a horrible man. Now, I don't think anybody else deserved what happened to them, but I do kind of think Yosef, the senior, the father, did. Or Andreas, my gosh, I'm so sorry. I keep wanting to say that Yosef and Andreas, I keep getting them mixed up. No, Yosef is the baby, and he didn't deserve anything bad that happened to him, of course, and Andreas is the horrible father that probably had it coming. So sorry. My goodness, I feel terrible for that. Again, I'm covering researching another case of another Yosef, and he was a bad guy, so I keep getting the two mixed up because I've done that research on him more recently than I did the research on this. This I did a few weeks ago, so please forgive me. I don't know how many times I said it wrong, so I can't really go back and edit it out. I mean, I guess I could in editing, but then there would just be like a weird blank switch thing going on. Anyway. So, the police are looking, they're investigating, but they're not getting anywhere. They're not finding any concrete evidence. They're not finding any for sure suspects or anything like that. And it's, time is starting to go by, days, weeks, and then months, and they're kind of questioning and doing, it's not, the police did try. They did try. It's not one of those cases that we so often hear about where the police just kind of let the case go. They absolutely tried. They wanted to know what happened and who did this as well. So they did try to solve this case. They just didn't. If you don't know anything about Hinterkaifeck, one of the most mysterious things about it is that it was never solved. So, which I think is what makes it more enticing for readers and listeners and everything. And while they're investigating, they're interviewing people because, again, like I said, the family were kind of seen as oddballs, and they did have a few enemies. Andreas had a way of, really pissing people off, and so a lot of people hated him, rightly so. He was a horrible person, and so, they were trying to figure out, was this, a organized hit? Was this, vengeance. What was this? And even the neighbor, Lorenz, was suspected for a while because they thought he didn't want to keep paying child support. And he did, like, pretty quick after the murders, like, try to apply to stop paying into the account for child support because, you know, young Joseph was dead. And but also at the same time, like, I don't know if he was as well off as the Gruber family, so he may not have been able to afford paying into that. And if the child is gone, then what is, you know, the point to keep having to pay this debt? So I can kind of see both sides of it, but other people thought it was suspicious. And maybe he had plenty of money and he just didn't want to pay for a child that wasn't alive anymore, and, you know, who knows. But people did suspect him because they thought that he was bitter over not getting to marry Victoria, and he hated Andreas, which everybody did, so it was like, yeah, well, we could see it happening. But there was no evidence other than that basic suspicion, and people did think it was weird that he had a key to the house. And I don't know, I guess he was able to give an alibi and tell the police what he was up to, because he had remarried someone else by this point. So he did have, like, a wife, and he said he was home with her, and she vouched for him, of course. Whether he did it or not, whether he was there with her or not, we'll never know. But, you know, so that, since they had no evidence of anything, I'm so sorry, I just hit the tripod. I need to do better. But I want to give this little fella some gold eyes. Yeah. There we go. Oh, I just realized I missed this little eyeball. I hope y'all can start to kind of see that now. Is it taking shape? Let's see, what color should I do his lips? There we go, yeah. There were a few more suspects that really caught onto the radar. They did talk to the previous maid and ask her, and she had some things to say about some people. So we'll kind of get into that. But before we jump into that, I will say this. This is a very weird thing. But this is kind of during the time when everybody was getting into, like, the spiritual movement and everything. So, you know, come the funeral time, the body's got to be buried, and they are going to bury them. But they bury all of them with no heads. The heads were removed and sent to a clairvoyant to see if that clairvoyant could gain any information about the killer from the heads. And weirdly, they couldn't. It didn't work. They weren't able to get anything, so that's weird, I guess. But, so the poor bodies were desecrated after death and buried headless, and it's believed the heads were being kept somewhere that was destroyed during World War II, during the Blitz. And so, the heads have never been found. We don't know where they are, and they probably will never ever be found. If the building they were in was destroyed, then that's kind of that, you know. I don't know. If they were somehow saved, then they're stored somewhere where it seems like nobody really knows where they are. And if they were found now, unless they're clearly labeled, I don't know if we would know where they are or who they are. You know, they might think it's just some other medical specimens or something like that. Kind of crazy. That poor family. So let's talk about the suspects other than neighbor Lorenz. There was a theory that Carl, Victoria's husband, might have been the killer, that perhaps he hadn't actually been killed in World War I and had come back and seen that she had had a child with somebody else and was so mad he just killed the whole family. Because, I don't know, there was a rumor going around that some people had seen him and knew he wasn't actually dead. But that was never proven. And it was pretty quickly dismissed, but some people wanted that to be the case, I guess, because it's more interesting for whatever reason. I don't particularly think so, but hey, man, it's not a 0% chance. It definitely could have happened that way, but probably not. And then there was two fellas called the Bichler brothers. Carl Bichler and George Mader, which, I mean, they're called the Bichler brothers, but they didn't both have the same last names, but anyway, and I couldn't really get a clear explanation on as to why that is, but, you know, we'll just keep going here. So it was said that they were both seen, Carl Bichler and George Mader were seen in the area around 3:30 a.m. that night. And they tried to hide their faces when somebody was walking by and saw them. It just said a witness walked by and saw them and like noticed they were acting kind of weird and trying to hide their faces, but he knew who they were. They were asked for help in a robbery at Hinterkaifeck by Anton Bichler, one of the other brothers. He was pissed off at Josef, and he knew that they had money hidden, or he believed they had money hidden on the farm, and he wanted to kill Andreas. I think I said Josef again. I'm so sorry. When I'm talking about Victoria's father, I'm talking about Andreas. But he wanted to kill Andreas to scare the women into telling him where the money was. And so it was suspected that maybe all had gone horribly wrong and they had done that. But they had alibis too, and that didn't check out. There were several other suspects that I saw in the research that I didn't even really bother writing their name down because it was just like people who were mad at somebody and wanted to throw them under the bus, or people who were scared of a transient walking through town that they didn't know. But saying that, I do have one final suspect written down, and if the transient thing is anything to look at, this suspect would fit that. His name is Paul Mueller, and he was a German immigrant that had lived in the United States for quite a while, and like, we don't know that he ever went back to Germany, but we don't know he didn't either. And the reason why we suspect him is because of how popular this exact kind of murder was of whole families in the United States from like the very, very late 1890s into the first like 10 to 12 years in the United States. And he is also a suspect, according to a couple of authors. I'll talk about them in a second. In a lot of the family annihilations by axe in a book called A Man from the Train. The Man from the Train, excuse me. And it's written by Bill James and his daughter, Rachel McCarthy. And they did some extensive research on, you know, similar murders to the Villisca axe murder in the United States at the time. And they were able to connect a lot, like a scary amount of murders to this one person that seemed to use the train lines to travel the United States, and most of these murders that kind of aligned with the Villisca were all within a mile or so of the train tracks, and so they think that somebody was riding the train lines all up and down the United States and finding a house nearby and just killing the whole family, which I will discuss that more in the Villisca episode because it applies there more. But some people have said that the theory of Paul Mueller somehow getting back to Germany and being the one responsible for Hinterkaifeck in 1922 is one of the best viable theories there are out there. I think we're almost done here. I'm going to color in the pots, in the sand, in the dirt. Where is... There it is. So the police did interview over 100 suspects, but they were just never able to narrow it down. So this case was never solved. And some people think because of the weird stuff happening before, that it actually might have more of a paranormal aspect to it than a human. I personally don't believe that. I don't necessarily know if I believe it was specifically Paul Mueller, but I do believe it was a human, a living human, or humans. It could have been a couple of people or just one, but I don't think it was a ghosty this time. As much as I would love to believe that, I don't think so. I think that this disgusting display of inhumanity sadly came from a disgusting human. Unfortunately, I don't think we can chalk this one up to entities. I think you could say the person was evil, but I don't think they were paranormal. I don't think we can attest that to a paranormal event at all. But for those of you that do believe that, I mean, totally on board with your beliefs, and like, it's not what I believe specifically, but I could see why people could believe that, and I don't like begrudge them that belief at all. Like, if that's what you think, then by all means, I'm not gonna try to shoot that down. Who am I to tell you that you are wrong? Because I am also wrong a lot, and I don't know that it wasn't. Let's see. I want to kind of do... What color should we do the flower pot? What color do we need to... It's going to jump out here. Actually, let's tone down this yellow a little bit. I'm not sure I really like that very much. Now, this is just a pastel, so it won't be as green. Well, if I don't smudge it, it will stay pretty green. I don't know. We'll see. Let me smudge one part and see how I like it. So, you know, that's the theories, is it was several of these townsfolk or whatever, maybe the neighbor, maybe Paul Mueller, maybe a ghost, maybe a demon, but there's no concrete evidence. So, later, and I didn't write down the year, which I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I didn't write the year down on this. But anyway, it was sometime in like the 90s, 1990s or so. Because I remember, or may have even been in the 2000s. I remember when I was reading it, it had been a ridiculously long time since the murders. A German police academy secretly tried to solve the case, and they were unable to solve it, but they did form a theory. What is that theory, you ask? Well, they're not going to tell you. They don't want to release their theory out of respect for the remaining family. So, not to be rude or anything, but I call bullshit on that. And I just think you can't be like, well, we think we solved it, but we don't know. And out of respect for the family, we're not going to say. Like, what was your entire point then? Why did you even attempt to do this if you're not going to tell us who you think did it? So either that's a possibility that they actually do have a solid theory and they're just trying to respect the family, which, you know, I think the family, any remaining family, as late as this was after the crimes, this was decades and decades, like 70 years after the crimes when they delved into this, maybe 80 years. Any immediate family that was still alive by then is probably going to be gone by now. But also, if there is any remaining family that remembered these people, wouldn't they want to know? Wouldn't it give them a little bit of just, you know, because when this stuff happens and it goes unsolved, that tears people apart who knew the victims. Not having any answers at all just is some of the worst torture that a family can go through when their loved ones have been murdered. And if, like, I don't know, maybe they told the family and only the family their theory and the family asked them to keep it quiet because maybe it was Andreas, which it wasn't, because there's no way. There's just no way. It couldn't have been him. He couldn't have bludgeoned himself to death. So I don't know what that whole jive is. I saw that when I was researching and I was like, because I don't remember ever on any of like the podcasts I've listened to, which I mean maybe a bunch of the podcasts I've listened to just haven't brought it up because it's stupid, because it's like, why'd you even say anything? If y'all aren't going to release the information, then why say anything at all? Just keep it to yourselves. Or maybe they said something when they started, and then after a while they were like, oh, well, you know, we looked into it, and we don't want to say anything out of respect for the family. But I just find that whole thing kind of ridiculous, you know, like, what was even the point? If you're not going to be forthcoming with whatever information you have or found, which probably wasn't much, because it doesn't seem like they kept any evidence other than the heads they lost, which I think should have been made more of a big deal. But I guess, you know, well, maybe not during World War II when they were lost, but maybe make sure they get buried with them. That seems kind of like not a whole lot to ask, to bury the family with their heads, but they didn't, and then their heads were lost. So I don't know. So that's kind of it. That's Hinterkaifeck, and it is a weird, disturbing case that remains unsolved today. And if you have any theories or want to tell me anything about this episode, leave a comment. I'll be thrilled to chat with you about it. I've always been very mystified by this case, but, you know, like the rest of us, haven't ever had a lot of information about it, so don't know where to go from there. Let's give this a little bit of gold here. We want it to pop a little bit. What do y'all think of my crazy little Venus flytrap? Ooh, see, now that I'm looking at it and I'm not trying to read off my notes, I'm seeing a lot of spots I missed. I'm going to go back here and give it some little silver dots. So, yeah, let me know in the comments what you think. If you have a theory, maybe you have a theory on somebody I didn't even mention, I would love that. You know, I'll talk to you about anything. And, you know, keep in touch. If you like what you see, give me a subscribe, give me a like, send a share out to somebody and let them know. If I'm not your cup of tea, maybe I'll be for somebody that you know. So, yeah, let them know. Alright, well, I'm gonna say goodbye for the day, and I'll get this episode edited and uploaded, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.